Hi, this is Justin Colletti of SonicScoop, and today we're going to talk about the sexiest topic I can think of. Audio cables. Yes, audio cables, and more specifically, weird adapters that I think every musician, studio, producer, DJ should have. These are the things that are absolutely going to save the day for you when it comes not just to your sessions, but also your live gigs. In many cases, probably most cases, these are going to cost literally just a few dollars, but they can make the difference between having a great session or a great gig and one that went horribly wrong where you pulled your hair out for want of a $5 piece of metal and rubber when all of that could have been averted just by simply listening to this video and buying a handful of cables that I'm going to recommend in the description down below. I mean, this sounds like a weird topic, but there have been many occasions where I have thanked past Justin for buying cables that were weird that I didn't need then, that I said, at some point I might need the thing that goes with the thing to go into the other thing. Created a whole weird chain of adapters, and because I had spent a handful of dollars, all of a sudden we didn't waste hours in a session. We didn't have to change our plans for the gig, all because we had the right stuff on hand. So I'm going to give you my top picks. I'm going to break this down to 4 basic categories. And even if you just pick up 1 or 2 of the inexpensive items on this list, I think you're going to thank yourself in the future for it. And maybe you'll even remember this video and you'll thank me. But I don't need your thanks. I only need your likes and you're hitting the subscribe button. So if you haven't already, definitely get on it. Thank you very much. Your likes are actually my #1 source of calories. They keep me going. They keep me alive. Thank you for personally sustaining me with them. Speaking of sustaining, this video is free to the public thanks to our sponsors on this one, HOSA. HOSA was good enough to send me a whole bunch of weird cables as well as a whole bunch of nice cables. Not everyone knows it, but HOSA actually makes some really good, high-quality pro-level cables in their Pro line and in their Edge series. These are cables that go toe-to-toe, head-to-head with some of the other best cables out there. And they are absolutely the brand that I recommend for getting some of these weird cables from for 2 reasons. 1, they make basically every single weird type of cable on Earth. And you can find them all super easily over the HOSA Tech website with their online cable finder. Super useful tool for finding the exact kind of weird cable that you need. Reason number 2, although HOSA do actually make really high-end cables that not everyone knows about, but when it comes to these weird types of cables and adapters we're going to be talking about, HOSA makes them super duper affordable, which is good because these are the kinds of cables that you might only need a few times in your life. But shelling out a few dollars on them could literally save the day for you. So I want you to be able to justify buying as many of these weird types of little cables as possible, which means I want them to be super affordable for you. And HOSA is good at that too. So without any further ado, let's get into my list of the weird cables that every studio, possibly musician and producer, needs to have. Type number 1 of weird cable that every studio needs to have are breakout cables and splitters of all types. A breakout cable or a Y cable looks a little bit like this. You've got 1 jack or plug on one end and you've got 2 on the other. They come in 2 basic flavors. These can be Y cables that actually duplicate your signal, or they could be stereo breakout cables that take a stereo input on one side and put out 2 mono outputs on either side. Usually, a stereo breakout cable will be red on one side and black on the other for left and right, and a Y cable might be all the same color the whole way through, like this one here. Probably the most important and most obvious type of cable in this category would be the stereo breakout cable for things like smartphones, iPads, laptops, anything that goes from 1/8 inch to maybe dual 1/4 inch or dual RCA, things that allow you to plug consumer devices into your studio gear. This is super duper important. But one little caveat I will give you is that for the newer styles of iPhones, you may need to get a second type of breakout cable that would go from the Apple Lightning connector to female 1/8 inch. And then you go from female 1/8 inch to dual 1/4 inch or RCA or whatever you might need. In the case of fancier studios with nice patch bays, you might need 1/8 inch to dual bantam or TT connector. But in my opinion, it is important to have more than one of these because these types of cables grow legs. How do cables grow legs? I don't know. You buy a bunch of these types of cables, start your own studio, let people use them, and you'll find out how these kinds of cables can grow legs. So it's a good idea to find an inexpensive source for these and to have multiples of them on hand. These are not only important in studios, they might arguably be even more important on live gigs where you need to interface with PA systems. So absolutely have some of these types of cables. But these aren't the only types of Y cables. You also have Y cables, I said, that duplicate the signal like this. We've got a TRS on one side, 1/4 inch, and then dual 1/4 inch TRS on the other side. This would allow you to get an extra set of headphone outputs. If you're in a studio where you only have, say, 2 headphone outputs, and you occasionally, but not always, have 3 people who might need headphone outputs, you just get one of these splitters, and this is way less expensive than upgrading your interface or buying an external additional headphone amplifier. You get one of these for like several dollars, and then all of a sudden you have an extra headphone output available. There are other types that duplicate the signal as well, such as one of these connectors. It's got a 1/4 inch instrument jack on one side and 2 female 1/4 inch jacks on the other side. So you could plug 2 guitars into one guitar amplifier. Do you need to do that all the time? Hopefully not. But on the rare occasion that you do need to do it, having this little inexpensive piece right here could absolutely save the day. And you've added it to your kit for next to nothing. Get one of them. In addition to these splitter and breakout cables, there are also what you might consider adapters. And adapters often change one type of connector to another. So one you'll see a lot is 1/8 inch or 3.5 millimeter, the little headphone jacks, to 1/4 inch headphone jack. These are super essential for interfacing headphones with pro-level audio gear. But sometimes you might need one that goes in the other direction. Here's one that goes from 1/4 inch to the little style headphone jack, 1/8 inch or 3.5 millimeter on the other side. So having both of these varieties, super useful. These walk too, so make sure you have a bunch of them. In addition to those, you might need other weird types of connectors. Like here's one that goes 1/4 inch to RCA. Or this one, super useful, a barrel connector. Especially for TRS balanced line level cables, there may be every once in a while that you need like 100 or 200 foot run of balanced TRS cable. But most of the time, you don't need 100 or 200 foot run. Well, if you get 1 or 2 or 3 of these, you can chain a bunch of balanced TRS cables together, and all of a sudden, you have a really long run without much issues around signal drop-off. And instead of having some really big, cumbersome 100 and 200 foot expensive cables around that you practically never use, you just have this adapter and then your normal cables, and it'll save you a lot of money, a lot of space, and a lot of time wrapping cables too, because now all of a sudden you can have 2 or 3 people wrapping up your 200 cable foot run instead of just one person wrapping it up because it's only one cable. But probably the most important type of adapter you're going to need are XLR to TRS and TRS to XLR. Yeah, 1/4 inch to microphone, microphone to 1/4 inch. And you'll probably want both styles. There are going to be times where it's super useful to have a male 1/4 inch XLR on one side and a TRS on the other side. But there's going to be other times where it's crucial to have an XLR female on one side and a TRS on the other side. And having at least a pair of each of those options can save your butt so many times in the studio or also out on live gigs. So I'd recommend having at least 2 of each of those types. But there's yet another category here, third category. Sometimes it's not enough to just change the type of connection. You also need to change the type of impedance, the type of audio signal traveling through that cable. And for those cases, something like this, an impedance transformer, can be extremely useful. This thick style of barrel connector will take a XLR on one side, 1/4 inch on the other side, but in doing so, it will go from low impedance mic signal on one side to high impedance instrument signal on the other side, allowing you to interface with things like guitar amps and guitar pedals. So if you want to plug a microphone into a guitar amp or into a guitar pedal to have some fun, absolutely you can use a tool like this. You can even use a tool like this kind of like a reamping box. Instead of spending a whole bunch of money on a reamplification box to take signals out of your DAW and into an amplifier or some weird physical processor, you can really just use an impedance transformer like this at a fraction of the cost and usually have results that are just about as good. I actually prefer the kind not with a 1/4-inch male connector on it, but with a 1/4-inch female connector on them. I find that these male ones, if you plug them into a pedal or a guitar amp, there's just so much weight and leverage kind of messing with the jack on the guitar pedal or the guitar amp that I prefer the ones with the female end. It does require one extra cable that way, but it's really not a big deal. A related concept to this that HOSA also makes is they make a barrel-shaped inline mic preamp. So if you ever needed to take a microphone signal and juice it up to line level without having to go through your computer or interface first, this kind of inline mic preamp will do that. This is the most expensive item on this list of cables so far, but it can totally be worthwhile if you're trying to do the kinds of things that we're talking about with a hotter, more juiced up signal. And there's also the opposite of this concept, a direct box. A lot of modern interfaces do have instrument inputs built right into the front of them, kind of like having a direct box right inside of your interface. But if you're dealing with any higher end professional audio gear, you might not have that luxury of having an instrument input on every single one of them. So if you wanted to take a bass or a guitar or a synthesizer and go through one of your nice preamps or nice compressors or nice hardware EQs, having a direct box can let you do that, putting high impedance instrument signal in on one side and coming out with low impedance microphone signal on the other side. So you can interface with a mic preamp and then all of your other audio gear after that. HOSA makes all these options as well, and honestly, I have literally dozens of weird cables from HOSA in my bag of weird cables, and they have saved my butt on many occasions, and I'm glad that they are as affordable as they are, so I could buy cables that I knew I wouldn't immediately need, but might need someday. And at least like 2/3 of the cables in that weird bag of cables have saved the day at least once. So I'm going to implore you to start your own collection as well. The last main type of cable that I think every studio needs to have more of are power cables. All the kinds of power cables. And the most important one I'm going to lead with, this is going to be the first type of cable that HOSA does not make to my knowledge, and that is a UPS or uninterruptible power supply. This one is an absolute must. You might also hear this referred to as being a battery backup. There's some really good ones that can cost $200 or more, but I've seen some options on Amazon and the like for less than $100, in some cases $70 and less. If you're in the middle of recording a take and all of a sudden there's a little brownout, it could shut down your computer and your interface and ruin the take. But having one of these uninterruptible power supplies, a UPS, stops your computer from shutting down just because there's a brownout or even a blackout, often giving you enough time to save the take. And who knows, maybe you can even get the whole rest of the take in the dark, and now you have a story about like, yeah, that was the song in the album where we finished the vocal take when the power was out. I mean, how cool is that as a story? But what's even more likely to happen is that you're going to be on like mix revision number 90 hunched over your computer, and you're like, I finally got the snare drum to sound right, and then there's a brownout then, and your whole computer crashes, and you don't remember what EQ moves you made, and you say, no! But if you had the uninterruptible power supply, you'd at least have enough time to frantically hit save multiple times before you ran out of battery juice. And maybe even just keep on mixing in the dark, just because that's totally badass before saving the session and shutting down your computer. So one of those, totally useful. Every studio should have one. Not exactly a cable, but enough cable related that I think I should mention it. The other big type of power cable that I think every studio should have a whole bunch of is all of the types of phone charger that there are. Now, yes, theoretically, every client or collaborator you work with should have their phone fully charged and should have their phone charger with them in case there's a problem. But you and I live in reality where that doesn't happen most of the time, and particularly doesn't happen with people as creative as musicians, let's put it that way. So if you are the person who has all of the types of phone chargers, you can save not only your day, but save the day for your artist, client, or friend, be Johnny on the spot or Jane on the spot hero of the day, and also save your own day as well. Because what if the lyrics that they were going to be singing or spitting onto the mic was on their phone and now their phone's dead? Or what if one of the other musicians who's supposed to join you was going to call your client or text him for the address to your studio and now his phone's dead and the collaborator doesn't know how to get there? If you had every type of phone charger for Android and Apple and new versions as well as old versions, just spending a handful of dollars on these can make other people's experience in your studio and your own experience in your studio dramatically better. There's also a fifth category here that's not as audio specific, but can still be super useful in studios. We could think about digital cables. Things you should have around like HDMI cables or USB style adapters. For instance, HOSA has a really useful digital cable adapter that goes from USB-A type to USB-C type. So also think about what kind of cables you might need in the digital domain. But that is probably one of the most useful ones I can think of for interfacing slightly older versions of technology with slightly newer versions of technology. And there is one more category of device that I should mention on the digital side, and that is a Bluetooth transmitter receiver. I spent a lot of time early on stressing about how you should get these analog cables to connect phones and laptops and iPads to your audio gear, but you can actually do the same thing via Bluetooth. If you don't necessarily need to pass through full resolution audio and you're comfortable and okay with a little bit of data compression that Bluetooth does, this is probably the most convenient way to hear reference tracks through your main studio speaker system. You should totally have a Bluetooth receiver in your studio. And unlike the little splitter cables we were talking about earlier, these are a lot less likely to walk away on you. And if you want to be as geeky as me, you might think about picking yourself up a cable tester to help figure out which of your cables or connectors has gone wrong if you need to troubleshoot an elaborate setup and finally ferret out once and for all which cable is shorting out on you and driving you crazy. Another thing that's super useful for anyone who works with cables and audio gear is a product called Deoxit that you can get on the HOSA website as well. They make contact cleaners, contact enhancers that help you get rid of crackles and pops and grit and things like knobs and potentiometers and faders. Super useful to have in the studio as well. So those are the types of cables and connectors I think you have to have in the studio to be able to have a good time. To get even more specific, look at my whole list down there in the description below. Click on a bunch of them and buy whichever ones make the most sense for you. It's not going to cost you a lot to do so, but you are going to thank yourself. And I think ultimately, someday, one or more of these cables will save the day for you, and you will thank me. You'll say, Justin, I remembered that video you did on cables. Thank you, thank you, thank you for making me buy this cable. To which I will say, I don't need your thanks. I only need your likes and your subscribes and your hitting of the notification bell and your commenting down below with how awesome this video was, which ones of these cables you wish you had before everything went wrong for you, which of them you have had on hand that totally saved the day, and which ones you think I've left off. Let me know in the comments down below. I always love to hear from you guys, and I read every single one and respond when I can. Big thanks again to HOSA for helping make this video free to the public. They make actually, honestly, really good high-end cables in their Pro series and Edge series. But if you're like me, you know them first and foremost for their really inexpensive, affordable cables and connectors that you can find in all of the biggest music stores. And you can also buy right on their website, hosatech.com. It's a good thing that they make really inexpensive, really affordable cables and connectors, because the whole point with the types of cables and connectors we're talking about today isn't that you're getting the fanciest ones so you can use them every day. The idea is they're inexpensive enough so you can buy them without even questioning it, so that they're there on those few occasions that you need them. And we're spending just a few dollars on a cable has saved your session, has saved your gig. Thanks for hanging out with me. This has been Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. Hope to see you next time.